David Harrington was a man who prided himself on his achievements. At 48 years old, his name was synonymous with success. He owned a string of high-end hotels, sat on the boards of influential companies, and lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city skyline. For all intents and purposes, he had everything: a life of luxury, power, and endless possibilities. Before we dive into this story, let us know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We'd love to hear from you. Yet David wasn't known for his kindness. He believed in the power of hard work, and to him, that meant if you were struggling, you weren't trying hard enough. He had always maintained a strong stance against handouts, convinced that those asking for help simply didn't have the grit to pull themselves up. On a chilly afternoon, David had just finished a meeting with one of his key investors. His mind was buzzing with numbers, deals, and plans for the future as he stepped out onto the busy street. He adjusted his tailored coat and began walking toward his waiting town car. As he approached the car, his path was blocked by a woman. She stood out in the crowd, not because she was loud, but because of the quiet desperation that clung to her. Her clothes were worn, and she held the hand of a young boy who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't mean to bother you, but I could really use your help. I've been trying to find work, but it's been hard with my son, and we've just been evicted from our apartment. I'm not asking for a handout, but maybe if you could spare some change or help me find a job." David's expression hardened. He didn't even look at the woman directly, instead focusing on the boy beside her. His eyes narrowed, and he sighed. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe in handouts. There are plenty of opportunities out there if you look hard enough." The woman's face fell, but she didn't break. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I really am. But it's been hard, and I don't have anyone else to turn to." David's phone buzzed in his hand, and he glanced down, impatient. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." He stepped past her and climbed into his car without another word. Monica stood there, stunned. Her son, Jaden, tugged at her hand, his innocent eyes looking up at her, unaware of the gravity of the moment. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears, but they came anyway, hot and fast. She had tried everything. Applying for jobs, asking friends for help, selling what little she had left, but nothing seemed to work. She was a single mother, a black woman fighting an uphill battle in a world that didn't seem to care about her struggles. Every door had been slammed in her face, and David Harrington had been no different. She had heard about his wealth, about the countless businesses he owned, and had thought that maybe, just maybe, he would have the heart to lend a hand, but she was wrong. With a deep breath, she wiped her tears quickly before her son could see. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry in front of him. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though she didn't believe her own words. "Mommy's going to figure this out." Monica pulled Jaden close and started walking again, her mind racing. She couldn't give up. Not now. Not when Jaden needed her the most. She needed a plan, something that would turn the tide in their favor. That night, in the dim light of a shelter, as Jaden slept beside her, Monica made a decision. She would no longer ask for help. No one was coming to save them. She had to fight for her son, for herself. There was a determination in her heart that hadn't been there before, a fire lit by the cold rejection from David Harrington, and she knew exactly what her next move would be. The following morning, Monica woke up with a new sense of purpose. Her body was exhausted from days of worry and sleepless nights, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had spent the entire night thinking, planning, and figuring out what she could do to change their situation. Her first stop was a local library. She knew she didn't have much in terms of formal education or work experience, but she was resourceful. If no one was going to give her a job, she would create one for herself. She had always been good with her hands, and back when things were better, she used to bake small treats for her neighbors. People loved them. That memory sparked an idea. She could start a small business, selling baked goods on the street or in local markets. It wouldn't be easy, but it was something she could control, something that didn't require anyone's permission to start. Monica spent hours researching recipes, business licenses, and what little savings she had left. She even looked up the costs of renting a small space to operate out of, though the numbers made her heart sink. Still, She refused to let herself feel discouraged. She had no choice but to make this work. For Jaden, for herself, she needed to make a way out of no way. The rest of the day was spent gathering supplies from discount stores, scribbling down plans in the margins of a worn-out notebook, and contacting a few old acquaintances who might be able to lend her some kitchen space. Monica had a vision now, and nothing was going to stop her from pursuing it. The desperation of her situation had turned into determination, and she could feel a change coming. While Monica was busy building her future from the ground up, David Harrington's life continued, unaffected by their brief encounter. In his world, the weeks passed by with business meetings, luxurious dinners, and cocktail events filled with influential figures. He was thriving, or so it seemed. But, at odd moments, like when he was alone in his office late at night, or when he watched the city lights from his penthouse, David would feel a strange sense of restlessness. Something about that day, when the woman and her son had approached him, lingered in his mind. He shrugged it off. It wasn't his responsibility to help every stranger who asked for it. After all, he had earned everything he had through hard work and smart decisions. He had no room in his life for people who didn't take control of their own destinies. Still, he found himself thinking about her, the desperation in her eyes, the quiet dignity with which she had accepted his rejection. What had happened to her? Where had she gone after he turned his back? He shook his head and pushed the thought away, returning to his work. He had no time for distractions like that. His world was one of results and power, and there was no room for sentimentality. But little did he know, the woman he had dismissed so easily was about to take a step that would change both their lives forever. Monica threw herself into her new venture with everything she had. She started small, baking out of a friend's kitchen late at night when Jaden was asleep, and selling her goods at local markets during the day. The first few weeks were difficult. Barely enough sales to make ends meet, but enough to keep her going. Word started to spread about her treats. They weren't just good, they were incredible. Monica's passion and love for her craft shone through every bite, and soon enough people began to seek her out. Her small stand became a regular stop for locals who appreciated not just the food, but her determination. She named her business Jaden's Treats, after her son, hoping that one day it could grow into something that would give him a better life. As the weeks turned into months, things slowly began to change. Monica found a small cafe that agreed to sell her baked goods on consignment. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was a step up, and it brought in enough income to stabilize her and Jaden's living situation. She moved out of the shelter and into a modest apartment. Despite her exhaustion, Monica felt a deep sense of pride. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something, and all of it was for her son, who had been her motivation from the very start. Months passed, and David Harrington continued his life of wealth and privilege. His business was booming, and his social calendar was full of high-end events and meetings with powerful figures. On the surface, everything was perfect, but that sense of restlessness persisted. No matter how much he achieved, how many deals he closed, or how much wealth he accumulated, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The encounters he had with the people outside of his inner circle, those who struggled, began to weigh on him. The memory of that woman and her son still gnawed at the edges of his mind. One day, while reading through the local business news, David's attention was caught by a headline. Local black single mother launches thriving bakery business after facing homelessness. The article featured none other than Monica and her business, Jaden's Treats. David stared at the photo of Monica, standing proudly in front of her small bakery stall with her son by her side, a warm smile on her face. The article detailed her story of resilience, how she had gone from homelessness to becoming a successful entrepreneur in just a few short months. He felt his chest tighten. This was the same woman he had refused to help that rainy afternoon. She had come to him, desperate for a lifeline, and he had coldly turned her away. And yet, despite his refusal, she had not only survived but thrived. The article praised her determination, her grit, and how she had single-handedly changed her and her son's future. David's mind raced. How had this woman, who had nothing, achieved so much in such a short time? He had been so quick to dismiss her, to judge her situation without offering so much as a second thought. Now, here she was, proving him wrong. The realization hit him harder than he expected. Monica didn't need his help after all. But why did that make him feel so unsettled? David couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that came with reading about Monica's success. He sat in his office, the article still open on his screen, staring at her picture. She had done it without him. In fact, she had done it despite him. The woman he had dismissed with barely a thought had turned her life around and, in doing so, had exposed a truth about himself he didn't want to face. He wasn't the man he thought he was. For years, David had prided himself on his self-made success. He had believed that wealth and privilege came only to those who earned it, those who worked for it. He had told himself that people like Monica were a product of their own choices, people who simply hadn't worked hard enough or weren't smart enough to escape their circumstances. And yet, here she was, proving him wrong in every possible way. The realization was like a blow to his pride. He had turned away from her, refusing to offer help when she needed it most. But instead of letting his rejection define her, she had pushed forward, not just for herself, but for her son. David felt something shift inside him. The wealth, the deals, the endless meetings. It all suddenly seemed so hollow. What had all his success been for, if not to help others? He had the resources, the power, the ability to make a difference, yet he had chosen indifference. That realization weighed on him like an anchor, and for the first time in years, he felt truly ashamed. David knew he had to do something. He couldn't let his coldness that day be the end of the story. He owed her an apology, but more than that, he wanted to help. Not because she needed it, clearly she didn't, but because he needed to make things right. A few days later, David found himself standing outside a small cafe that sold Monica's baked goods. He wasn't sure what he was doing there, or even what he would say if he saw her. All he knew was that he needed to see her again, to acknowledge what he had done, and offer her something, anything to make amends. He stepped inside, and the aroma of fresh-baked pastries filled the air. Behind the counter, Monica was busy, laughing with a customer as she packaged up a small box of treats. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The weight of her struggles was still there in her eyes, but now there was also a light, a sense of triumph that hadn't been there before. David hesitated, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had faced down the toughest boardrooms, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, yet standing here, in front of the woman he had once refused, he felt nervous. He approached the counter, his heart pounding in his chest. Monica looked up as he neared, her smile faltering as recognition dawned on her face. "You," she said softly, her voice a mix of surprise and something else. Disappointment, maybe. "I remember you." David swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. I'm sorry," he stammered, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I was wrong. About you. About everything." Monica said nothing, just stared at him, waiting. David shifted awkwardly, unsure of what to say next. "I read about your business," he continued, trying to gather his thoughts. "You've done amazing things, and I want to help." Monica crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Help?" she echoed, her tone cool. "Like you wanted to help me that day." David winced. "I know. I wasn't thinking. I judged you, and I shouldn't have. You asked for help and I turned you away, and I've regretted it ever since." For a long moment Monica didn't respond. The tension between them was palpable, and David felt every second stretch out painfully. Finally, she sighed, her eyes softening just a little. "I didn't need your help then," she said quietly, "and I don't need it now." David nodded, feeling the sting of her words, but understanding their truth. "I know. You've proven that you're more than capable on your own. But I want to do something, anything, to make up for how I treated you." Monica stared at him for a moment longer, then shook her head. "I didn't do this to prove anything to you. I did it for my son. To show him that no matter how hard life gets, you don't give up." David lowered his gaze, feeling the full weight of her words. "I know," he said softly. "But if there's ever anything I can do, I want you to know that I'm here." Monica looked at him carefully, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe someday." Weeks passed, and David couldn't shake the encounter with Monica from his mind. Every now and then, he would check in on her business, always from a distance, watching as it continued to grow. Jaden's Treats was becoming a local favorite, gaining more recognition in the community, and Monica's success only seemed to strengthen with each passing day. For David, seeing Monica thrive was both humbling and inspiring. He had spent so long disconnected from the realities of those less fortunate, but Monica's story had opened his eyes. She had taught him that success wasn't just about wealth and power, it was about resilience, determination, and compassion. One afternoon, as David sat in his office, staring out at the city skyline, he made a decision. He began to shift his focus, not just in business but in life. He started funding programs to help struggling single parents, invested in local community centers, and created scholarships for those who lacked the resources to pursue their dreams. It wasn't a grand gesture to make up for his past indifference. It was a genuine change in his perspective, a way to use his wealth and influence for good. Meanwhile, Monica's business continued to flourish. She expanded Jaden's Treats into a small bakery, employing other single mothers who needed a second chance, much like she had once needed. Her story became a beacon of hope for others, and soon she found herself not just as a business owner, but as a community leader, helping those who were struggling to find their own paths to success. One day, as Monica prepared for another busy day at the bakery, she noticed a familiar figure standing outside. David Harrington stood there, quietly observing from the sidewalk, his expression softer than it had been that first day they met. Monica smiled. She had long since let go of the bitterness that once consumed her. She didn't need David's apology, nor his help, but she appreciated the change she saw in him. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about her, her son, and the future she was building. David caught her eye and gave a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had both been on. They didn't need to speak. They both understood that life had a way of humbling you, of showing you what really mattered. As Monica walked back into her bakery, Jaden ran up to her, beaming. "Look, Mom," he said, holding up a drawing of their bakery, with people lined up around the block. "One day, it's gonna be even bigger." Monica laughed, her heart swelling with pride. "I know, baby. One day." And as David turned to leave, the sun setting behind him, both he and Monica understood that their paths had crossed for a reason. Sometimes it takes the most unexpected encounters to change the course of your life. But now, both of them were on their way to something greater, something they had built, not with wealth or status, but with perseverance, humility, and the unshakable belief that anything is possible.